Right, I've got a little Vivaro 1.6 bi-turbo, one of them engines. It's come down for a extended cranking, non-start. Well, it will start after a few cranks, but it takes a while. Been told potentially injectors need changing. Obviously I wanted to do a little diagnosis on it first before we go changing £1,000 of injectors. So if you come down, scanned the ECU, no fault codes for low fuel pressure, which is somewhat odd. Usually if you get an injector go bad, you'll get a low pressure code, as in the fuel will be leaking back to the tank rather than going into the engine. So obviously when it came down, it was bad at starting. You'd crank it, it wouldn't start. You do 2 or 3 attempts, it would start up. Afterwards, plumes of white smoke coming out of it, and then it'd be misfiring a little bit, and obviously then would run. It would clear, but it would run quite poorly when it actually initially started. However, the fuel pressure itself didn't seem to be the issue, it just seemed to be not starting. So obviously could be other things. However, I wanted to do a little bit of diagnosis on it myself, so doing a live data reading on the fuel pressure while cranking, the fuel pressure seemed to climb to 350 bar, which is ample to start one of these engines. In theory, once it gets to around that sort of 300 bar, it should start. Wasn't, you'd give it 2 or 3 goes before it actually went. So once it was running, it seemed fine, but it was the initial starting. So yes, you know, you would look at things like the injectors, knowing what these Bosch injectors are like. They're not great high mileage, and this is a taxi, so this is probably the 8th engine it's had. It's got 200 million miles on it, so you know, we just got to play it by ear with it. So obviously the first thing I wanted to do was do a leak off test on it to see if any of these injectors are leaking back. Obviously you've got the leak off tubes coming off the top of the injectors, and these, if they're knackered internally, will leak the fuel back rather than holding the pressure in the injector. It will leak back and come back round back to the tank, which will then not allow the pressure to build. However, as I said, live data would say the fuel pressure was fine, but you know, we've got to have a look. So done a leak off test on it. All the injectors seem to be okay, as in minimal leak off, all roughly about the same, nothing really to report there. So when you're looking into other potential causes, when I pulled the leak off tubes off, strong smell of petrol rather than diesel. So obviously I pulled a little fuel sample out, and lo and behold, the system is full of a petrol diesel mix. So where it's coming from, obviously 4 injectors, to be honest, the petrol was what's causing the problem. So sometimes, you know, looking at it first rather than going gun-ho and just going, oh, we know what, we'll change over them 4 injectors for 1,500 quid, proves useful, shall we say. So obviously sometimes if you've got a fuel pressure rising to past what it should be starting at, maybe have a little look at the fuel, because the diesel fuel and the petrol fuel are obviously going to react completely differently inside the engine. You know, you're still gonna get the pressure sensor on the end of the rail reading the correct pressure, because it's still fluid going into the system and pushing against the sensor, so you're going to get the correct pressure. But when it's injecting it into the engine, obviously the petrol is going to vaporize pretty much immediately under the pressure and the heat inside when the engine is obviously when it's compression stroke. So it's not going to react the same, so you're going to vaporize the fuel before it's even being used, shall we say. So this one was fairly straightforward, but if you've got a longer cranking, but you know the pressure's there. Just check the fuel first, because this one is obviously going to be a case of we're going to drain the fuel out of it. We're going to obviously put a new filter in it, flush the fuel through, and it will be good to go again. But this is the trouble, obviously, when you're filling up or getting different people to fill up the vans, whatever. You know, they can put the wrong fuel in, whatever, and it's going to cause issues like this, where you know you are thinking it's going to be injectors. However, luckily enough, obviously a leak-off test, and you can smell the fuel immediately. As soon as you pull them tubes off, you can smell it's petrol. So I would say, going forward, if you have a crank, extended crank, shall we say, and a non-start, but you have got fuel pressure, check that obviously you've got the right fuel in it. So, as this one may have been an expensive mistake, so check your fuel.